Little girl knocked on Vampire King's door crying, "Please save my mom." His response shocked her. "Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much." The night was stormy, the wind howling through the trees, and the streets of the city were nearly deserted, save for one small figure running desperately through the rain. Her footsteps were barely audible over the deafening noise of the storm, but her heart beat loudly in her chest, filled with a mixture of fear and hope. A young girl, no older than 10, with tear-streaked cheeks, clutched the hem of her coat tightly, hoping the warmth of the fabric would somehow comfort her in the bitter cold. She had been running for what seemed like hours, her breath coming in ragged gasps as the rain soaked her to the bone. She had one purpose in mind, one destination: the castle of the Vampire King. She had heard the rumors, the whispers in the village. The Vampire King had the power to do anything, even save lives. And her mother was in danger. She couldn't wait any longer. Her mother had fallen ill, and nothing seemed to help. The doctors had given up. Her last hope was the king. She had no choice but to go to him. When she finally arrived at the castle gates, she could barely see through the sheets of rain that poured down, but she knew she had to act quickly. The guards standing at the entrance stared at her with cold, indifferent eyes, but when they saw the desperation in her face, they hesitated. She was just a child, drenched and shivering, yet there was something about her that made them pause. Without a word, she raised her trembling hand and knocked on the massive wooden door. The sound was muffled by the storm, but it was enough. The door creaked open, and there, standing in the doorway, was the last person she expected to see: the Vampire King himself. His presence was imposing, his tall frame cloaked in darkness, his piercing eyes glowing faintly red. He regarded her silently, his face unreadable. The girl's breath caught in her throat as she finally found her voice. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Please save my mom. She's dying. No one can help her but you." The king's expression remained cold, unfeeling, but something in his gaze shifted. For a moment, there was a flicker of something: pity, perhaps, or perhaps curiosity. He didn't speak immediately, just stood there, his eyes studying her carefully. The girl's hands shook as she waited for his response, her hope dwindling with each passing second. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the Vampire King spoke. "Come inside," he said, his voice low and commanding, yet there was an unexpected gentleness in it. The girl stepped forward cautiously, not knowing what to expect, but knowing that this was her only chance. The door closed behind her, and the heavy silence of the castle enveloped them. She could feel the weight of the king's gaze as she led him toward her mother's room, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and relief. What would happen next? Would he be able to save her mother? Or was this just another hopeless attempt at salvation? The Vampire King said nothing as they walked through the grand halls, but there was an unmistakable tension in the air. She didn't know what kind of power he had, but she had to believe it was enough to save her mother. The weight of the situation hung over her, and as they reached her mother's bedside, she felt a glimmer of hope in the darkest of times. This was her last chance. She had to believe. She had to trust the Vampire King. Would he truly save her? Or was it all just a cruel twist of fate waiting to break her heart? The Vampire King followed the young girl through the castle's dark, silent hallways. His footsteps echoed softly, a stark contrast to the soft, almost imperceptible sound of her footsteps. The weight of the situation was heavy on both of them, but he showed no sign of impatience. His expression remained cold, unreadable, yet there was something in his eyes, something flickering beneath the surface that hinted at emotions he had long buried. The girl clutched the hem of her coat tightly, too scared to speak but too desperate to stop. Her heart raced with every step. She had hoped that the king would help, but now, as they neared her mother's room, doubts crept in. What if he could not save her? What if this was all just a cruel mistake? She quickly wiped away the tears that threatened to fall again. As they reached the door to her mother's room, the Vampire King paused, his hand resting lightly on the doorknob. He turned to the girl, and looked down at her with those piercing red eyes that seemed to see right through her. "Stay here," he said, his voice as cold and distant as the rest of him. "I will see what I can do." The girl nodded, stepping back a little as he pushed the door open with a soft creak. Inside, the room was dimly lit by a few flickering candles, casting long shadows across the stone walls. Her mother lay in bed, pale and barely breathing, her frail form barely visible under the heavy blankets. She was a mere shadow of the woman she had once been. The girl's heart ached as she watched the vampire king step into the room. His tall frame seemed to fill the space, his movements deliberate and precise. He knelt beside the bed and placed his cool hand on her mother's forehead. His gaze softened for a moment, but only for a split second, before he closed his eyes and began to chant something in a language the girl could not understand. The air in the room seemed to shift, the temperature dropping slightly as the king's magic took hold. The girl stepped closer to the bed, watching in awe as her mother's breathing became a little steadier, the color in her face slowly returning. Her heart pounded in her chest as she dared to hope. Could this really work? The vampire king's hands glowed faintly as he continued his chant, his focus unwavering. Time seemed to slow, each passing moment stretching out as he worked his magic. The girl held her breath, afraid to move, afraid to disturb the delicate balance. After what felt like an eternity, the vampire king opened his eyes. He stood, his expression still unreadable. "She will live," he said softly, though there was a hint of something else in his voice, something like regret. "But it will take time for her to fully recover." The girl felt a rush of relief flood through her. She wanted to rush to her mother's side, but she didn't want to break the moment. Instead, she stood there, tears streaming down her face, as the vampire king slowly turned to leave. As he reached the door, the girl hesitated, then spoke. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "You saved her. Thank you." The vampire king paused at the door, his back still turned to her. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, just before he stepped out, he turned slightly and spoke. "I didn't do this for you," he said quietly. "I did this because I owed her. I didn't save your mother, child. I saved a piece of my own past." With that, he disappeared into the darkness of the hallway, leaving the girl alone in the room with her mother. She stood there for a long time, not knowing what to feel. Gratitude, confusion, fear, everything seemed to rush through her at once. The vampire king had saved her mother, but what did his words mean? And why had he said he owed her mother? She couldn't understand it, but she knew one thing for sure. Her life, and her mother's life, would never be the same again. I had never seen her so still. My mother, lying in the bed, her breathing still shallow, her color slowly returning. It felt surreal to witness the vampire king's magic take effect. She was alive, she would be fine, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in my chest. He had saved her, yes, but the way he spoke, his words, they lingered in my mind. He didn't do it for me. He did it because he owed her. What did that mean? Who was my mother to him? And why did he keep mentioning the past? My mind was racing with questions, but I couldn't ask them now. I couldn't disturb the fragile peace that had settled over my mother. I sat at her bedside, waiting as the hours passed. The candles in the room flickered and dimmed. I hadn't even realized how much time had passed until the knock came. It was soft, almost hesitant. I looked up, my heart skipping a beat. The door creaked open slowly, and there he stood. The vampire king. I wasn't sure what I had expected, but it wasn't this. The cold, imposing figure I had seen earlier was now softened by the glow of the candlelight. There was something different about him now. He wasn't the same as he had been when he first walked into the room. He wasn't just a king, or a monster, or a savior. He was a man who had once known love, who had once been human, at least in some sense. His gaze locked with mine, and for a moment, we both just stood there in silence. Then he spoke, his voice low but steady. "How is she?" I looked down at my mother, still in a deep sleep. "She's better. She's breathing easier now. Thank you." The words felt so inadequate, but they were all I could manage. He nodded slowly, his gaze lingering on her for a moment before returning to me. "She's strong," he said softly. "She has a will to live. It will take time, but she'll recover." I swallowed hard, nodding. "You didn't have to do this. I know you said you owed her, but," my voice faltered. "Why? What does she mean to you?" The question hung in the air, and for a moment, I regretted asking it. I had no idea what kind of answer I was expecting, but I hadn't prepared myself for what came next. The Vampire King took a deep breath and let it out slowly. He walked across the room and stood by the window, his back turned to me. "I didn't always live this way," he began, his voice distant, as if he were speaking to himself. "There was a time when I was human, when I had a family, when I had love in my life." His words caught me off guard. I hadn't expected him to share anything like this. "What happened?" I asked before I could stop myself. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned back to face me, his eyes shadowed with something I couldn't quite place. "My family died," he said simply. "The love I had, it was lost." The room seemed to grow colder as the weight of his words settled over us. I could see the pain in his eyes, a kind of sorrow that seemed to stretch on for centuries. "And your mother," he continued, she reminded me of what I lost, of what I never thought I'd find again. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My mother, just an ordinary woman, was somehow connected to the Vampire King's past in ways I couldn't understand. I wanted to ask more, to demand answers, but something stopped me. I knew that this was not the time. He wasn't ready to reveal everything, and I wasn't sure I was ready to hear it. Instead, I simply nodded, unsure of what else to say. The Vampire King seemed to notice my hesitation and gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. It wasn't much, but it was something. "I'll leave you to rest," he said, his tone softening. "But remember, if you need anything, I'm here." He turned to leave, but paused at the door, glancing back at me one last time. "I didn't do this for you," he repeated quietly. "I did it because it was the right thing to do." And with that, he was gone. The door closed behind him, and I was left alone in the room with my mother. The weight of his words lingered in the air, and I couldn't help but wonder if he would ever tell me the truth about his past. What had happened to him? And how was my mother involved? For now, I had no answers, only questions. But one thing was clear. The Vampire King had saved my mother, and in doing so, had changed everything. My life, and my mother's, would never be the same again. I stood by my mother's bedside for hours after the Vampire King left, the silence in the room almost suffocating. My mind was racing with questions, and the only sound was my mother's steady breathing, each breath a small victory. The king had said she would recover, but I still couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more to the story than he was letting on. Why had he saved her? And why had he spoken about his past with such sadness? There was something haunting about him, something I couldn't quite place. What had happened to him to make him so detached, so unreachable? I had heard the rumors, of course, the stories about the Vampire King and his reign, the legends of his power. But the king I had just met wasn't the monster I expected. He was human, in a way, at least for a moment. I couldn't help but wonder if there was more to him than the cold, ruthless king that everyone feared. As the evening turned into night, I finally left my mother's side, too exhausted to stay awake any longer. But sleep wouldn't come easily. I kept replaying everything in my mind, his words, his actions, the way he had looked at me when he spoke of the past. There was something else there, something I had to understand. The next morning, as the sun broke through the clouds, I felt a shift in the air. There was a knock at the door, soft but deliberate. My heart skipped a beat. Was it him again? Was he here to speak more about the past? Or was it something else entirely? I opened the door cautiously. This time, it wasn't the Vampire King standing there. Instead, a woman stood in the doorway, tall and regal, her posture straight and commanding. She had the same pale complexion as the king, and her eyes, though not as red, still carried the same ancient weight. "I am Lady Seraphine," she said, her voice smooth and authoritative. "The king has sent me to check on your mother's condition." I stepped aside to let her in, my curiosity piqued. I had no idea who she was or what her role was in all this. The room felt different now, charged with the presence of this mysterious woman. She moved with grace, her eyes scanning the room before landing on my mother. "She is recovering well," Lady Seraphine said, her tone impassive. "But I must ask, what do you know of the king's past?" I froze. How could she know that I had questions about him? I hadn't said a word to anyone. "What do you mean?" I asked cautiously, my voice barely above a whisper. "The king's past is not something he speaks of often," Lady Seraphine continued, her eyes never leaving my mother's still form. "But there are things you need to know, things that are more complicated than you might think. My heart raced. I had been hoping for answers, but not like this. I had no idea where this conversation was going, but I knew it would change everything. The king owes a debt to your mother, she said, her voice softer now. A debt that stretches back farther than you could imagine. I opened my mouth to ask more, but she raised a hand to stop me. Not yet, she said. First, you must understand the gravity of what the king has done. He didn't save your mother out of kindness, at least not entirely. There's something more at play here, something that binds him to her. I could hardly breathe, the weight of her words settling in my chest. What does that mean? I asked, my voice trembling. You will find out soon enough, Lady Seraphine said, her expression unreadable. But first, you must stay here. There are dangers ahead, and your presence is needed. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if I was ready for whatever was coming next, but it seemed there was no choice. I had already been drawn into a world I never asked for, a world of power and danger, and now it seemed I was stuck in the middle of it. The room grew quieter, the air heavy with tension as Lady Seraphine turned to leave. We will speak again, she said, her eyes meeting mine one last time. But for now, take care of your mother. That is the only thing that matters. With that, she left, disappearing into the hallway with the same grace she had entered. I stood there for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. What did she mean about the debt? And what role did I play in all of this? I had no answers, but I knew one thing for sure. My life, my mother's life, and the future we had envisioned were no longer ours to control. We were caught in a web spun by forces beyond our understanding. The only thing I could do now was wait, and brace myself for the truth, whatever it might be. I sat in the dimly lit room, the quiet hum of the castle surrounding me. My mother was still asleep, her condition stable thanks to the Vampire King's intervention. But despite the relief, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was caught in something much larger than I had ever anticipated. Lady Seraphine's words echoed in my mind. The king owes a debt to your mother. What did that mean? Why was my mother so important to him? As I sat there, staring at my mother's pale face, a deep sense of unease settled in my chest. I had lived a simple life, a life that revolved around caring for my mother, working as hard as I could to keep a roof over our heads, and doing what I could to make ends meet. But now, everything had changed. The Vampire King had entered our lives in the most unexpected way, and with him came questions, secrets, and a debt that seemed to span centuries. The more I thought about it, the more confused I became. What kind of debt could a king owe a simple woman like my mother? And why did Lady Seraphine seem so cryptic about it? I couldn't rest. I had to find answers. I had to understand why we were caught up in this. The castle felt cold, more oppressive than I had realized. The walls seemed to close in on me as I walked through the corridors, trying to gather my thoughts. I had no idea where I was going or what I was looking for, but something inside me told me I needed to get answers, and I needed to do it now. As I turned a corner, I almost bumped into someone. Startled, I stepped back, only to find myself face to face with a tall man. He was dressed in a dark cloak, his features hidden in shadow, but I could see his eyes, piercing, cold, and full of something I couldn't name. You're the girl who's been causing quite a stir, he said, his voice smooth but laced with an edge I couldn't ignore. The one the Vampire King has taken an interest in. I stood frozen for a moment, unsure of how to respond. I'm sorry, I stammered. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. The man chuckled softly, though there was no humor in it. Oh, you haven't caused trouble yet. But you will. You're tied to something far greater than you realize. His words sent a chill down my spine. Who are you? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He stepped closer, and I instinctively took a step back. I'm someone who has been watching this little drama unfold. You see, your mother's past is more entangled in our world than you ever thought. She's a key piece in a much older game. His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. What game? I asked, my curiosity now overwhelming my fear. The man's lips curled into a faint smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. A game of power, of secrets, of bloodlines. Your mother is more than just a healer, more than just a mother. She has a connection to the Vampire King that goes back long before you were born. No, I said, shaking my head. That's not possible. My mother is just a simple woman. A simple woman, he repeated, his tone mockingly sweet. Oh, she may appear that way to you. but she's far more complicated than you can imagine. The Vampire King's debt to her is centuries old, and it's a debt he cannot ignore. I felt my heart race, my mind spinning with confusion. What do you mean? What kind of debt could he possibly owe her? The man stepped closer, lowering his voice to a whisper. That, my dear, is a story you are about to learn. But be warned, once you know the truth, there's no going back. He turned to leave, his cloak flowing behind him like a shadow. You're not the only one searching for answers, he called over his shoulder. And some truths are better left hidden. I stood there, my body frozen in place. What had I just heard? What was the man trying to tell me? I had so many questions, but now, more than ever, I feared the answers. As I stood in the hallway, staring at the spot where the man had disappeared, I realized one thing. The Vampire King wasn't the only one with secrets. My mother's past was a mystery, a puzzle I had to solve. But with every piece I uncovered, I felt like I was stepping deeper into a world that I wasn't ready to understand. And yet, I knew I had no choice. I had to find the truth. I had to find out what my mother's connection to the Vampire King really meant. And when I did, I would finally understand the full scope of the danger we were in. I spent the following days in a haze of confusion and uncertainty. The words from the mysterious man echoed in my mind, each one more unsettling than the last. My mother's past, something so hidden, so powerful, was now a mystery I had to solve. Every moment I spent in the castle only deepened the sense that I was walking through a maze with no clear way out. I had no choice but to keep going forward, though I feared what I might uncover. The Vampire King had saved my mother's life, but at what cost? What debt did he owe her, and why had he chosen to help us now? Lady Seraphine's cryptic message about the king's past only added to the growing list of questions I needed answers to. As I paced the castle halls, trying to sort through my thoughts, I knew one thing. I couldn't stay in the dark forever. I needed to confront the Vampire King. I had to understand his connection to my mother. I couldn't wait for another cryptic encounter or a chance meeting with a mysterious stranger. It was time to take control. Late one evening, after the castle had grown quiet, I found myself standing in front of the Vampire King's chambers. The hallway was dark, lit only by the flickering torches that lined the walls. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood there, hesitating. I had never been this close to him before. What if he refused to speak with me? What if I wasn't ready for the truth? But there was no turning back now. I had to know. I took a deep breath, knocked twice on the door, and waited. Moments later, the door creaked open, revealing the Vampire King. He looked as imposing as ever, his red eyes glinting in the dim light. His gaze softened just slightly when he saw me standing there, but there was still an air of mystery surrounding him, something I couldn't quite understand. You wish to speak? His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. I nodded, gathering my courage. Yes, I need answers, I said, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at me. I need to know why you saved my mother. The Vampire King stepped back, holding the door open. Come in, he said, his tone surprisingly gentle. We have much to discuss. The room was as dark as the hallway outside, but it felt warmer, more inviting. There was an old fireplace in the corner, its flames casting a soft glow across the room. As I stepped inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to learn something that would change everything. I sat down in one of the chairs he gestured to, feeling a mix of anticipation and dread. The Vampire King remained standing, his expression unreadable. I saved her because I had no choice, he began, his voice surprisingly soft. Your mother is not just any woman. She is the key to something much larger, something that has been hidden for centuries. I stared at him, my mind racing. What are you talking about? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. My mother is just a healer. She's nothing special. The king looked at me, his eyes filled with an emotion I couldn't place. She is more than you know, he said, his voice tinged with sadness. Your mother was once part of a secret society, a group of individuals who held the power to change the course of history. The debt I owe her is not one that can be repaid easily. I leaned forward, my curiosity piqued. What kind of power? What debt? The Vampire King sighed and finally sat down across from me. He studied me for a moment before speaking again. Many years ago, your mother helped me in ways no one else could. She healed me when I was gravely injured. But it wasn't just physical healing. She gave me something I lost long ago, hope. He paused, his gaze drifting toward the fire. After all these years, I still owe her for that. I never forgot what she did for me, and when I heard she was in danger, I couldn't let her suffer. I was stunned by his words. My mother, part of a secret society, healing the Vampire King? But why didn't she ever tell me? I asked, my voice a whisper. She didn't want you to know, he replied quietly. She wanted to protect you from the truth. But now, it seems the truth is catching up with all of us. His words left me speechless. I couldn't comprehend everything he was saying, but there was no doubt in my mind that my life, and my mother's, was far more complicated than I had ever imagined. What does this mean for us now? I asked, my heart racing. It means that your mother's involvement with me is far from over, the Vampire King said, his tone serious. There are forces that want to use her, and you, for their own purposes. I've protected you both for as long as I can, but soon, the world will come looking for you. His words sent a chill down my spine. The world? Who else knew about my mother's past? Who else was hunting her, and now me? I'll keep you safe, the Vampire King said, his voice firm. But you need to understand, this is bigger than us. And soon, we will have to face whatever is coming. I nodded, trying to absorb the weight of his words. Everything was changing, and there was no going back. The truth was out now, and I had no choice but to walk this dangerous path alongside the Vampire King, whatever that might mean. I woke up the next morning with a sense of unease gnawing at my stomach. The events of the previous day seemed like a blur, a whirlwind of new revelations, secrets, and unsettling truths. The Vampire King had offered to protect us, but what exactly did that mean? Who else was coming for us, and why? My mother was still sleeping, but I couldn't help but wonder what kind of danger lay ahead. The truth had been unveiled, and now it felt like there was no turning back. My life had been intertwined with the Vampire King's in a way I had never imagined. I was no longer just a simple girl, trying to care for her sick mother. I was a part of something far larger, and the weight of it was suffocating. I had barely stepped out of my room when I heard footsteps approaching. I froze, knowing it was him before I even saw him. The Vampire King. I didn't know why he was here or what he wanted from me, but I felt a strange mix of fear and curiosity. He appeared in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space with an air of authority. His crimson eyes locked onto mine, but there was something different in his gaze. It was softer, more human. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and steady. I nodded, unsure of what to expect, but I followed him down the long, cold hallways of the castle. As we walked in silence, I couldn't help but feel the weight of his presence. His every step was purposeful, his every movement calculated. It was clear that he was someone who was always in control, but now, there was a sense of vulnerability in him that I hadn't seen before. We reached a small chamber at the end of the hall. The room was dimly lit, with stone walls and a large window that overlooked the vast expanse of the castle grounds. The view was breathtaking, but I couldn't focus on it. My mind was too full of questions. "Sit," he instructed, gesturing to a chair beside a wooden table. I sat down, my heart racing, waiting for him to speak. He moved to the other side of the table and sat down as well. His eyes never left mine, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in them. "There's something you need to understand," he said slowly, his voice heavy with meaning. "The debt I owe your mother is not just a matter of favor or gratitude. It's far more complicated than that. Your mother holds a place in this world that no one else can occupy." My confusion deepened. "What do you mean? She's just a healer. She's just a woman who wanted to help." He sighed, looking away for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. "Your mother's lineage is connected to an ancient power, a power that has been hidden for centuries. She is the last of her kind, a guardian of a secret that has been passed down through generations. The debt I owe her goes beyond anything you could imagine." I was stunned. "What kind of power?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He met my gaze again, his expression serious. "A power that could change the fate of the entire world," he said softly. "Your mother was chosen to protect it, but that responsibility has come at a cost." I leaned forward, my heart pounding in my chest. "What do you mean by that? What does this have to do with me?" "It has everything to do with you," he replied. "You are the one who will have to carry the burden. You are the one who will have to make the choice." I shook my head, disbelief flooding my mind. "I don't understand. I'm just a girl. I have no power. I can't do anything." The vampire king's eyes softened, but there was still a heaviness in his gaze. You are stronger than you think, he said. Your mother's blood runs through your veins. You are connected to something much larger, much older than you realize. And when the time comes, you will have to make a choice that will determine the fate of everything. His words hung in the air like a dark cloud. I felt as though the floor beneath me was giving way, as though everything I had known up until this point was crumbling. How could this be happening? How could my life have turned into something so unnatural? I didn't want any part of it. I just wanted to live a normal life, to take care of my mother, to have the peace we once had. But I knew that wasn't possible anymore. The vampire king's presence was a constant reminder of that. What happens now? I asked quietly, my voice barely audible. Now, he said, leaning forward slightly, we prepare. There are forces out there who will stop at nothing to claim the power your mother has been guarding. And they will come for you, for both of you, when they realize that the last piece of the puzzle is within reach. I felt a shiver run down my spine. What should I do? I asked, barely above a whisper. Stay close to me, he said firmly. Trust me when I say, you are not alone in this. I will protect you. But you must be ready, because the battle for the fate of this world is coming, and when it does, you will need to choose where you stand. His words echoed in my mind as I sat there, still processing the enormity of it all. I had no idea what was to come, but one thing was clear. My life had been changed forever. There was no turning back now. I sat there for a moment, the weight of the vampire king's words pressing heavily on me. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything he had just revealed. I had always thought I was just a normal girl, trying to take care of my sick mother, living in a world where nothing extraordinary ever happened. But now, it seemed like my life had been a lie. My mother, the woman I had always known, was connected to something much bigger than I could ever imagine. She wasn't just a healer. She was part of an ancient bloodline, guarding a secret so powerful that the fate of the world depended on it. And now, that secret was my responsibility. I looked up at the vampire king, still seated across from me, his gaze steady and unyielding. He wasn't the monster I had been told about. He wasn't some ruthless ruler bent on destruction. But he wasn't just a man either. He was something far more ancient, far more dangerous. And he had tied his fate to mine. What happens now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The question had been hanging in the air for what felt like an eternity. Now, he said, his voice low and commanding, we prepare. There are forces out there who will stop at nothing to claim the power your mother has been guarding. And they will come for you. His words sent a chill down my spine. I had always thought that my life would be simple, that I could continue living quietly, but now I was caught in a world I didn't understand, a world filled with danger and deceit. But how? I asked, unable to stop the fear from creeping into my voice. How do we prepare for something we don't even know about? The vampire king stood and walked over to the window, his back to me. For a moment, I thought he wasn't going to answer, but then he spoke, his voice distant, like he was lost in thought. The first step is to learn everything you can. Your mother's bloodline, its history, its power. It is the key to everything. You must understand it, or you will be lost when the time comes. I nodded slowly, trying to absorb his words. But I don't know anything about that. My mother never told me anything. I don't even know where to begin. The vampire king turned to face me then, his expression unreadable. That's why I'm here, he said. I will teach you. But it won't be easy. You will have to face your fears, confront the darkness in your past, and accept the truth about who you are. Only then will you be able to make the right choice. The right choice? I asked, confused. What do you mean? The vampire king's gaze darkened. There will come a time when you must choose. You will have to decide whether to embrace your power or let it go. But that choice will not be easy. There are many who will try to manipulate you, to control you. They will tell you that you are not capable, that you are too weak. But you must learn to trust yourself, to trust the blood that runs through your veins. It is your heritage, your responsibility. I swallowed hard. I had always felt small, insignificant, like I was nothing special. But now, everything was changing. I wasn't just a simple girl anymore. I was part of something much bigger. I was connected to an ancient legacy, and I had no idea how to handle it. The pressure felt suffocating. What if I don't want this? I asked, my voice trembling. What if I just want to go back to my normal life? I don't want to be a part of all this. The Vampire King's eyes softened slightly, though his expression remained serious. You can't go back, he said quietly. Once you know the truth, there is no going back. You are already caught in the web. The only choice you have now is how you face it. I stood up, feeling the weight of his words pressing down on me. I had never been prepared for any of this. I had never asked for this responsibility, for this power, for this world of vampires and secrets. But it was here now, and I had no choice but to face it. I had no choice but to learn what I needed to learn and make the decision that would determine the fate of not only my mother and me, but the world itself. As I walked away from the Vampire King, the weight of my destiny settled on my shoulders. I didn't know what was coming, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't face it alone. I spent the next few days locked in thought, trying to digest everything the Vampire King had told me. The world I had once known, simple, safe, was gone. In its place was a tangled mess of power, danger, and ancient secrets. I couldn't ignore the reality that my mother's past, my own bloodline, was entwined in something far greater than I had ever imagined. I had never wanted any of this. I just wanted a quiet life, a chance to take care of my mother. But now, I was caught in the middle of a war. I didn't understand. There was no escaping it. The king's words echoed in my mind, and as much as I tried to push them away, they stayed. You are part of something much larger. The truth, the power inside me, it was all connected. But how could I possibly live up to that? I wasn't a hero. I wasn't prepared for a battle that had been going on for centuries. Yet, there was no denying it. My mother was connected to the Vampire King in ways I didn't fully understand. And now I was too. I needed answers, but I also knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. As I sat by my mother's bedside one evening, I felt the weight of it all. The Vampire King had said I was strong, that my bloodline carried the weight of an ancient power, but none of that made me feel less afraid. If anything, it made it worse. I had never wanted this kind of responsibility. And what if I failed? What if I couldn't live up to the expectations? I stood up, pacing the room, unable to sit still. My mind was racing, my heart pounding with the uncertainty of what was to come. My mother was still unconscious, but she seemed to be getting stronger. The king's magic had worked, but now it was up to me to figure out what came next. The knock at the door startled me, pulling me from my thoughts. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if it was the king again, but when I opened the door, it wasn't him. It was Lady Seraphine. She looked as poised as always, her eyes sharp, calculating. She didn't speak at first, but instead studied me for a moment, as though she were measuring my worth. You've been thinking, she said finally, her tone neutral. I can see it in your eyes. I nodded slowly. I don't know what to do next, I admitted. There's so much I don't understand. So much I don't know. Lady Seraphine stepped into the room, her gaze flicking over my mother's still form before landing on me again. The Vampire King has already given you what you need, she said. Now, it's up to you to decide how to use it. Her words were heavy with meaning, and for the first time, I felt a sense of understanding, if only for a moment. I don't want to be a part of all this, I said quietly. I never asked for this. I just want to keep my mother safe. Lady Seraphine's eyes softened, but there was a hard edge to her voice when she spoke next. You don't get to choose, child. The world doesn't wait for you to catch up. Your mother's past is your responsibility now. Whether you want it or not, you are part of this story. The truth of her words hit me like a wave. There was no going back. I couldn't undo what had already been set into motion. I didn't know what the future held, but I had no choice but to face it. So what do I do now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Lady Seraphine stepped closer, her expression unreadable. You train. You learn what you need to know. And when the time comes, you make your choice. And what happens if I choose wrong? I asked, the fear in my voice impossible to hide. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she simply studied me with those sharp eyes, as if evaluating my very soul. Then you'll live with the consequences, she said, her voice low. But remember, there's no such thing as a perfect choice. Every path has its dangers. Every choice has its price. I swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. What if I fail? I whispered, my fear rising to the surface. What if I'm not strong enough? Lady Seraphine didn't flinch. You will be, she said, her voice unwavering. You have more power in you than you realize. But first, you need to accept that you are more than just a girl. You are the heir to a bloodline that is centuries old. And with that, you have the strength to change the world or destroy it. The room fell silent after her words. The weight of what she had just said hung in the air, suffocating me. I didn't know how to respond, didn't know how to accept that I was tied to something so ancient, so dangerous. But there was no denying it. I was part of it now, and whether I liked it or not, I had a role to play. My heart pounded in my chest as Lady Seraphine turned to leave. "We'll begin your training soon," she said, her voice calm but filled with authority. "Until then, take care of your mother. She will need you more than you know." As she left, I felt the weight of her words settle in. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with danger and choices I wasn't ready to make. But I had no choice but to face it. I was caught in a world that wasn't mine, and now I had to survive it. I spent the next few days immersed in a whirlwind of preparation, uncertainty, and training. Lady Seraphine's words still echoed in my mind. "You have more power in you than you realize." But despite the truth in her statement, I couldn't help but feel utterly unprepared. Every day, the Vampire King and Lady Seraphine taught me the ancient ways of my bloodline. My powers, my heritage, they were all part of a world that I had no control over. I had been thrown into a storm, and all I could do was try to hold on. The training sessions were grueling. I was pushed to my limits, learning ancient rituals, defensive spells, and mental techniques that connected me to the power running through my veins. But every time I closed my eyes and focused on the magic, it felt distant, like I was trying to reach something just beyond my grasp. There were moments when the power flared within me, when I could feel it coursing through my body. But those moments were fleeting, like flashes of light in a dark room. I could never quite hold on to it long enough to feel in control. The Vampire King watched me closely, his eyes never leaving me during our training sessions. He was patient, but there was always a coldness about him, as though he was waiting for something. I often wondered if he believed in me, or if he was simply waiting for me to fail. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling training session, I collapsed onto the floor, exhausted. My body ached, and my mind felt like it was being pulled in 1,000 different directions. The Vampire King stood over me, his expression unreadable. "You have to be stronger," he said quietly, his voice colder than usual. "Your powers are the key to everything. If you can't master them, there will be consequences." His words stung, but I knew he wasn't wrong. I couldn't afford to fail, not when my mother's life and the future of everything I knew were on the line. "I'm trying," I said, my voice strained. "But it's not easy. It's like I can feel the power, but I can't control it. It slips away every time." The Vampire King knelt beside me, his crimson eyes boring into mine. "The power is inside you," he said softly, "but it's buried deep. You must learn to trust it, to let go of the fear that holds you back. Until you do, you will never be able to harness it fully." His words resonated within me, but the fear still lingered. What if I couldn't do it? What if I failed? The thought was paralyzing, but I knew I couldn't let it control me. I had to push forward. I had to be stronger. Over the following weeks, I pushed myself harder than ever before. Each day felt like a battle, each step forward harder than the last. But slowly, something began to change. I could feel the magic stirring inside me more easily. At first, it was just a flicker, a spark that ignited when I needed it most. But with each passing day, the flickers grew longer, more stable. I began to control the magic, though it still felt foreign to me. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I doubted myself, when the fear crept in again. But I knew I couldn't afford to give up. My mother's life depended on me. The night before my final test, Lady Seraphine came to visit me. She stood in the doorway, her eyes scanning me carefully. "You're ready," she said simply. But I could see the doubt in her eyes. "Are you?" she added quietly. I nodded, though I could feel the unease rising within me. "I have to be." She nodded once, a small, approving smile crossing her lips. "Tomorrow will be your greatest challenge," she said. "But remember, you are not alone. The king is watching, and he believes in you." Her words didn't comfort me as much as they should have. The Vampire King's belief in me felt like a heavy weight, like an expectation I couldn't quite live up to. But there was nothing left to do but face the test. The next morning, I was led into a darkened chamber. The Vampire King stood at the center, his cold eyes fixed on me. Lady Seraphine stood nearby, her arms crossed. watching with an intensity that made my heart race. "This is your final test," the Vampire King said, his voice low and commanding. "You will face your fears, your doubts. Only then will you prove you are ready to control the power within you." I nodded, my throat tight with anxiety. I could feel the weight of their gazes on me, the pressure to succeed pushing me forward. The room was silent as the test began. Shadows seemed to twist and shift around me, and a voice, low, menacing, whispered in my mind, "You're not strong enough. You'll fail. You'll never be the one to save your mother." Fear gripped me like a vice, and for a moment, I felt paralyzed. But then, something inside me shifted. I had trained for this. I had faced every obstacle, every doubt. I wasn't going to let fear control me anymore. With a deep breath, I reached deep inside, calling on the power that had been buried within me for so long. At first, it resisted, but I pushed harder, willing the magic to respond. And then, like a flood, it surged through me. The room lit up with a blinding light as the shadows scattered. The voice in my mind faded, replaced by a rush of power I could finally control. I opened my eyes, breathless, to find both the Vampire King and Lady Seraphine staring at me with wide eyes. "You did it," Lady Seraphine said, a hint of pride in her voice. The Vampire King stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "You are ready," he said simply. But as I looked at him, I realized that this was just the beginning. The true test was still ahead. The stakes were higher than ever before, and the road would only get harder from here. But for the first time, I felt ready. The power inside me was no longer something to fear. It was something I could use. And with that, I knew I would fight to protect my mother, and to protect the world that depended on us both. I had finally done it. After weeks of relentless training, I had unlocked the power within me, the ancient force that was tied to my bloodline. I could feel it coursing through my veins, ready to be called upon when needed. But as the Vampire King stood before me, his cold gaze never leaving mine, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just begun a journey far more dangerous than I could comprehend. I had passed the test. I had learned to control my magic. But I also knew that nothing in this world was ever that simple. "You did well," the Vampire King said, his voice low and steady. "But this is just the beginning. The real battle is ahead of us." I nodded, trying to steady my breathing. The rush of power I had felt was overwhelming, and the fear that had gripped me for so long still lingered at the edges of my mind. I had proven I could control the power, but I hadn't proven that I could use it effectively in a real-world situation. And the Vampire King's words made it clear that the real test was still to come. "What's next?" I asked, trying to mask the unease in my voice. "Now," he said, taking a step closer, "you learn what it truly means to be part of this world. You'll have to face the consequences of your lineage and the choices that come with it." He paused, his eyes darkening slightly. "You must understand that the power within you is not just a gift. It is a weapon, and weapons are not given freely. They come with a price." A shiver ran down my spine at his words. I had never wanted to be a weapon. I had just wanted to protect my mother. But now, it seemed that my purpose in this world was far more complex. "What price?" I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. The Vampire King's eyes hardened, his expression turning serious. "The world will come for you, for your power. There are forces at play, groups who will stop at nothing to control what you have. Your mother protected this secret for a reason. But now that the secret is out, the battle for it will begin." His words echoed in my mind, and I felt the weight of them settling in my chest. The battle for what? The battle for me? For my bloodline? The thought made my head spin, but I knew one thing for certain. My life had changed forever, and there was no going back. "How do we fight?" I asked, my voice steady despite the fear growing within me. "We prepare," he said simply. "And when the time comes, you will choose where you stand." "Choose?" I repeated, confusion clouding my thoughts. "What do you mean?" He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "You will have to decide which side you are on. There are those who will want to use your power for their own ends. And then there are those who will want to destroy you to keep that power from falling into the wrong hands. The choice is yours." The gravity of his words hit me like a physical blow. I had never imagined that my life could be so complicated, so dangerous. I had never asked for this power, this responsibility. But now, it was mine, and there was no escaping it. The weight of my bloodline's legacy was heavy, and the price of it was one I didn't know if I was ready to pay. But I don't know anything about these sides, these forces, I said, my voice trembling slightly. How do I know who to trust? The Vampire King's eyes softened, though his expression remained serious. You won't know who to trust. That's part of the challenge. You will have to rely on your instincts. Trust yourself, trust your judgment. He paused, as if considering something. And above all, remember that you are not alone. You have allies, and I am one of them. The words should have been comforting, but instead, they left me feeling more uncertain. Who were these allies? And how could I trust anyone in a world filled with so much deception? The Vampire King seemed to sense my unease. You'll have time to prepare, he said. But not much. The forces that are watching us are already moving. The clock is ticking, and we have to be ready when they make their move. When will that be? I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. Soon, he said. Very soon. The tension in the room was palpable. I had never felt more out of control in my life. I had powers, yes, but I had no idea how to wield them in the real world, in a world where enemies were lurking in every shadow. I don't know if I can do this, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm not ready. The Vampire King studied me for a long moment before speaking again. No one is ever truly ready, he said softly. But you will be, when the time comes. You will rise to the challenge, just as your mother did. She protected this secret for a reason, and now it's your turn to carry that burden. His words were like a lifeline, even if they didn't fully calm my fears. I didn't feel ready for what was to come, but I also knew that I had no choice. The battle was coming, and I would have to fight, whether I was ready or not. I took a deep breath and nodded. I'll do whatever it takes, I said, my voice firm. I'll protect my mother, and I'll protect this world. The Vampire King's eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time, I saw something that resembled approval in his gaze. Good, he said quietly. Then we fight together. I stood at the edge of the castle's main courtyard, feeling the cold morning air against my skin. It was a strange feeling, the calm before the storm. My training had prepared me as best as it could, but nothing could prepare me for the real battle that was about to begin. The Vampire King had been clear. The forces coming for us were relentless, and we had to be ready. I had trained to control my power, but that was only a small part of what was to come. I needed to be ready for everything. I needed to be ready to fight. As I stood there, watching the first light of dawn creep over the horizon, I couldn't help but wonder what kind of enemies we were about to face. The Vampire King had told me about the factions and groups that would seek to control the power of my bloodline, but he hadn't told me everything. There was so much more he kept hidden, so much more I didn't know. And that uncertainty gnawed at me. Are you ready? Lady Seraphine's voice cut through the stillness, pulling me out of my thoughts. I turned to see her standing behind me, her expression as unreadable as ever. I'm not sure I ever will be, I said quietly, my gaze still fixed on the horizon. But I have to try. I don't have a choice. She studied me for a moment. Before nodding, her face softening ever so slightly. You're stronger than you know, and you're not alone in this. The king is with you, and so am I. Her words should have comforted me, but they only deepened the weight on my shoulders. I had to be ready for whatever was coming, but I wasn't sure if I was. What's the plan? I asked, trying to focus on something tangible. Lady Seraphine's expression turned serious. We've been gathering allies, people who can help us defend your mother and the power she's protecting. But there's still so much to do. The enemies coming for us will not hesitate to strike. What kind of enemies? I asked, my voice steady despite the fear creeping in. You're not just dealing with vampires, she replied. There are other beings, witches, demons, and humans who are involved in this as well. They all want the power that your mother has guarded for so long, and they'll do anything to take it. My heart pounded in my chest. Witches, demons, and humans. This was far bigger than I could have imagined. But I had no choice but to step into this world, to fight for my mother and for the future of everything I had once known. How do we fight back? I asked. We use everything we've learned, she said. Your training, the alliances we've built, and the power within you. The time for preparation is almost over. Soon, we'll have to face them head on. Just as she finished speaking, I heard the heavy footfalls of the Vampire King approaching. He emerged from the shadows, his dark cloak billowing behind him. His eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of something, concern. Are you ready? He asked, his voice calm, though his eyes betrayed the tension he was trying to hide. I think so, I replied, meeting his gaze. But I'm still not sure what we're up against. You've told me about the groups that want my mother's power, but what's the real plan? How do we defeat them? The Vampire King stepped closer, his expression serious. The first step is to neutralize their leaders, the ones pulling the strings behind the scenes. Once we take them down, the rest will scatter. But it's not going to be easy. They've had centuries to prepare, and they won't give up without a fight. His words weighed heavily on me, and I could feel the gravity of the situation pressing in. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. This was about protecting everything we had left, everything my mother had sacrificed to guard. And what about me? I asked, my voice shaking slightly. What's my role in all of this? The Vampire King's gaze softened, just for a moment. You are the key. The power inside you is what they want. But it's also what we can use against them. You have to be ready to use that power, to fight back when the time comes. You can't hesitate. I nodded, trying to steady my nerves. The fear still lingered, but I knew I couldn't let it control me. I had no choice but to fight. I won't hesitate, I said, my voice firmer than I felt. I'll do whatever it takes. The Vampire King studied me for a moment before nodding. Good. We'll need your strength. He turned to Lady Seraphine. It's time. She nodded in agreement, and without another word, the three of us made our way to the war room. The castle had been prepared for this moment. The walls were lined with weapons, artifacts, and old tomes of magic. Our allies had gathered, waiting for orders. This was it. The battle was about to begin. As I stepped into the war room, I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about fighting for the future, for the world I once knew. And as I stood there, surrounded by those who would fight by my side, I realized that I was ready. Ready to face the darkness. Ready to confront the enemies who would stop at nothing to take everything from us. This was the beginning of a war I couldn't avoid, and I wasn't about to run from it. The battle had begun. I stood at the front lines with the Vampire King and Lady Seraphine, my heart pounding in my chest. Our forces were gathered, ready for the coming assault. The air was thick with tension, every moment filled with the anticipation of the unknown. We had trained, we had prepared, but none of us truly knew what to expect. The enemies we were facing were not just vampires or demons. They were part of a shadowy network that had been pulling the strings behind the scenes for centuries. They wanted the power within me, the power that my mother had protected for so long, and they would stop at nothing to take it. As the first wave of enemies approached, I felt a strange calm wash over me. The fear was still there, deep in my gut, but it no longer controlled me. The power within me, the magic that had once felt foreign and uncontrollable, was now something I could wield. I had learned to trust it, to embrace it, and I knew now that I wasn't just a pawn in a game of power. I was a player. The Vampire King stood beside me, his gaze sharp, assessing every move of the enemy. His presence was a steadying force, and I found myself relying on his calm demeanor more than I cared to admit. Stay focused, he said, his voice low but commanding. This is your moment. Trust in yourself, and the power will follow. I nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle within me. This wasn't just about protecting my mother anymore. It was about something much larger, something that would shape the world as we knew it. Lady Seraphine was by my side, her eyes scanning the battlefield, her movements fluid and graceful. Don't let them get too close, she said, her tone serious. We can't afford to lose ground. I couldn't remember the last time I had been so scared, but I also couldn't remember the last time I had felt so alive. The first wave of enemies broke upon us like a tidal wave, a blur of darkness and chaos. Demons, vampires, and witches all charging at once, their eyes filled with hunger and rage. But we were ready. I called upon the magic inside me, feeling it surge through my body like wildfire. The power flowed through my hands, shaping itself into a barrier of light that pushed back the enemy forces. I had never used my magic like this before, but as I summoned it, I realized that it wasn't just a weapon. It was part of me, part of my bloodline, part of my destiny. The enemies recoiled, but they didn't stop. There were too many of them, and they were relentless. But I wasn't alone. The Vampire King fought alongside me, his strength unmatched as he cut through the enemies with ease. Lady Seraphine was a whirlwind of grace and power, her every movement calculated, striking down enemies with precision. We fought as one, our forces working together to push back the tide of darkness. I felt the power inside me growing, the connection between my bloodline and the magic of this world becoming clearer with every strike, every wave of energy I sent forth. But even as we pushed forward, I knew this wasn't the end. The battle had only just begun, and the true test was still to come. As the enemy forces began to retreat, I saw a movement in the distance, a shadow, a figure that I recognized immediately. It was the leader of the faction that had been hunting us, the one who had orchestrated this attack. He was tall, cloaked in shadows, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "It's him," I whispered, my heart racing. "He's the one behind this." The Vampire King's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing as he took a step forward. "Stay back," he said, his voice low. "This is my fight." But I couldn't stay back. This was my battle too. The enemy leader had come for me, for the power within me, and I wasn't going to let him take it. I stepped forward, my heart pounding in my chest. The magic inside me surged, flaring brightly as I raised my hands. The leader of the faction laughed, his voice dark and mocking. "You think you can stop me?" he sneered. "You are nothing. Just a child, playing with forces you cannot understand." His words stung, but they didn't break me. I knew who I was now. I wasn't just a child. I was the heir to a powerful legacy, and I would not let him destroy everything I had fought for. "I'm not afraid of you," I said, my voice steady. The leader's expression twisted in anger, and he lunged toward me, his hands crackling with dark energy. But I was ready. I raised my hands, summoning the full force of the magic within me. The power surged, brighter than ever before, and with a single strike, I sent him flying back. He crashed to the ground, his form dissipating into shadows. The battlefield fell silent. For a moment, I thought it was over. But I knew better. This was just the beginning of a long, difficult war. The leader may have been defeated, but there would be others. The battle was not over. But as I looked around at the fallen enemies, at the Vampire King and Lady Seraphine standing by my side, I knew one thing. I had found my place in this world. I had embraced my power, and I would fight to protect those I loved. The future was uncertain, but I was ready. Ready to face whatever came next, ready to stand against the darkness, and ready to fight for the world that had become my responsibility. Vampire stories have captivated audiences for centuries, blending mystery, danger, and powerful characters into unforgettable tales. This particular vampire story follows a young woman who discovers that her mother is not just a healer, but a guardian of an ancient power. As she trains under the guidance of a powerful vampire king, she must confront enemies who want to steal the power that lies within her bloodline. With dark forces closing in, she must rise to the challenge and fight to protect her loved ones. As the story unfolds, our heroine learns that she is not just a victim of fate, but an essential player in a battle that will decide the future of both humans and vampires. In this gripping vampire story, the heroine struggles to master her powers while facing a relentless battle with enemies from all walks of life: vampires, witches, and demons. Throughout her journey, she discovers the strength within herself, and the Vampire King who trains her may be her greatest ally. But as the forces of darkness grow stronger, she must make difficult choices about loyalty, trust, and the destiny she never asked for. Vampire stories are full of surprises, and in this one, the heroine learns that the fight is not just about survival, but about embracing a legacy that has been hidden for centuries. With each twist and turn, this vampire story takes you deeper into a world of ancient power, betrayal, and the never-ending struggle between light and dark. As the final showdown approaches, the heroine finds herself not only fighting for her own life, but for the very future of the world. These vampire stories are filled with moments of intense emotion, thrilling action, and a deep sense of mystery that will keep you hooked from start to finish.